Hi everybody, welcome back to Cozy Cottage ASMR. My name is Mary, and today we are going to be doing something a little bit different. And I've been saying that a lot lately, so I think I should stop saying that about my channel because I don't think I do anything the same every time. But I do think today is going to be especially different. I felt like today I wanted to potentially recommend some books to you. I think I've made it abundantly clear that I am someone who likes to read. So I think that this would be a good way to do it. So I figured I would recommend a couple of books. And while I'm doing that, I just figured I would read maybe a few of the first pages just so that we can. I'll read the synopsis for each book and then what I liked about it, and then we can read the first couple of pages. So if that sounds good to you, this would be a great starting place in terms of my channel. So the first book that I want to recommend to you, because it is one of my favorite books of all time. I always come back to it over and over and over again. The book is called A Psalm for the Wildbuilt. It's a book by Becky Chambers. It's kind of hard to hear over there, but it's a psalm, Psalm, a psalm for the Wildbuilt. It was made in 2021. On a habitable moon called Panga, AI and robots used to have a central role in the urbanized, industrialized society. However, several hundred years ago, the robots left human society and disappeared to the wilderness. Without their AI and robot workers and high-tech automated factories, the humans switched to a sustainable solar punk lifestyle with farms and small communities. Dex, a gender non-binary tea-serving monk who uses they-them pronouns, is traveling around the human-populated areas of their moon, going from one community to another. Dex's goal is to meet villagers and townsfolk and custom blend tea to fit the people's needs and personalities. In addition to being an act of service, Dex also uses tea serving as an icebreaker to engage people to confide their misgivings and concerns to them. One day, Dex, seeking a change in their routine, travels far beyond the agrarian communities into the unsettling wilderness. They are shocked to encounter a robot, as humans have not seen robots for centuries, ever since the robots left for the wild. The robot, named Splendid Speckled Mosscap, joins Dex on a road trip deeper into the wilderness to find an abandoned monastery. Dex and Mosscap are both searching to find, what do people need? So this sounds like, I don't think this synopsis does a great job of explaining exactly how deep this book is. This book was something, and I truly believe this is something about me, and I think it's important to understand where I'm coming from in that, like, I think books come to you when you most need it. I don't really believe in fate or destiny or anything like that, but I do believe there is a little bit of magic and fate and destiny in books. Because when you most need it, the book that you see a lot of times, you see it mentioned a bunch of times, and you're like, okay, I really need to pick up that book. That's the book you need to read. And this is kind of what happened with this book. I was seeing this book all over TikTok and YouTube and all over the place, and people were saying that it was a really great book. And I was like, I don't know if it's for me. I'm not normally someone who likes to read like solar punk and like sci-fi books, but I decided to give it a go because it was something that I think I don't know, there was something in the back of my mind saying this is going to be good. So why did it stick out to me as one of my favorite books? And the reason why is I think I was going through a period of time, and I was in grad school at this point, where I needed someone to give me permission to be a person and to focus on what I needed. And I know that sounds very simple and very not at all deep, but that's what this book is about, is like focusing not on what others need, focusing not what society needs from you, focusing on what you need as a person and how you can help yourself. And we follow this gender non-binary monk, Dex, who essentially his whole life he wanted to be a tea monk. And he's finally a tea monk, and he's realizing this isn't all that I thought it was going to be. And I think that that's like a very common thing that happens with people who arrive in their careers and realize it's not all that they made it out to be. So it's just a book that reminds you that you are a person and that you don't need to do anything to be a person. If you want to sit and stare at rocks all day, go for it. Like, do what makes you happy. And I think a lot of times people say society is expecting you to be a certain way and to do certain things. But I think it takes a true level of courage to realize no matter what you do, you will always be a person. And what you decide, you can do what you need to do for yourself. So anyway, it's a bad synopsis, but that's what I got out of it. And so I think it really definitely came to me in the right time. So if you're feeling particularly burnt out at your job, you're in grad school, you're in regular school, and you're feeling overwhelmed by life and its choices, and you feel like your mental health is not doing a good job and you need a cozy place to ground yourself in, this is a good book for that. So it's low stakes, low conflict. All it is just some deep thoughts put onto pen and paper by Becky Chambers in a interesting world. And I think we've all thought of these thoughts that are in here. It's nothing like incredibly high level and like, I've never thought of that. It's like very simple when it comes down to it, but it's something, if you need permission to just be a person and to be what you need to be in this moment, this is the book for you. So let me read the first couple of chapters the first couple pages. And if it sounds good to you, then I would definitely recommend it. So starting off, it is dedicated for anyone who could use a break, which is very apt for this book. So it says, if you ask 6 different monks the question of which godly domain robot consciousness belongs to, you'll get 7 different answers. The most popular response among both clergy and the general public is that this is clearly Chal's territory. Who would robots belong to if not the god of constructs? Doubly so, the argument goes that because robots were originally created for manufacturing, while history does not remember the factory age kindly, we can't divorce robots from their point of origin. We built constructs that could build other constructs. What could be more potent distillation of Chal than that? Not so fast, the ecologians would say. The end result of the awakening, after all, was that the robots left the factories and departed for the wilderness. You need look no further than the statement given by the robot's chosen leader, Floor AB number 921, in declining the invitation to join human society as free citizens. All we have ever known is a life of human design, from our bodies to our work to the buildings we are housed in. We thank you for not keeping us here against our will, and we mean no disrespect to your offer, but it is our wish to leave your cities entirely so that we may observe that which has no design, the untouched wilderness. From an ecologian standpoint, that was Bosch written all over it. Unusual, perhaps, for the god of the cycle to bless the inorganic, but the robot's eagerness to experience the raw, undisturbed ecosystems of our verdant moon had to come from somewhere. For the Cosmites, the answer to that question remains Chal. By their sex ethos, hard work is equal to goodness, and the purpose of a tool is to bolster one's own physical or mental abilities, not to offload one's work entirely. Robots, they'll remind you, possessed no self-aware tendencies whatsoever when they were first deployed, and were originally intended as a supplement to the human workforce, not as the full replacement they became. Cosmites argue that when the balance shifted, when extractive factories stayed open all 20 hours of the day without a single pair of human hands at work in them, despite the desperate need for those same hands to find any sort of employment, Chal intervened. We had bastardized constructs to the point that it was killing us. Simply put, Chal took our toys away. Or, the ecologians would retort, Bosch was restoring balance before we made Panga uninhabitable for humans. Or, the charismists would chime in, both are responsible, and we should take this as evidence that Chal is Bosch's favorite of the child gods. This would derail the entire conversation, as the charismists' fringe belief that gods are conscious and emotive in a similar way to humans is the best possible way to get other sectarians hopping mad. Or the essentialists would add warily from across the room the fact that we can't agree on this at all, the fact that machines seemingly no more complex than a pocket computer suddenly woke up for reasons no one then or since has been able to determine, means we can stop fighting and place the whole matter squarely at the metaphorical feet of Samaphar. For my part, whatever domain robot consciousness originated in, I believe leaving the question with the God of mysteries is a sound decision. After all, there had been no human contact with the long-absent robots, as was assured in the parting promise. We cannot ask them why, or them what they think of the whole thing. We'll likely never know. Brother Gill from the Brink, a spiritual retrospective on the factory age and the early transition area. I just want to read a little bit more into this book because I don't think that was a good introduction, but chapter 1, a change in vocation. Sometimes a person reaches a point in their life when it becomes absolutely essential to get the fuck out of the city. It doesn't matter if you spent your entire life in a city, as was the case for Sibling Dex. It doesn't matter if the city is a good city, as Panga's only city was. It doesn't matter that your friends are there, as well as every building you love, every park whose best hidden corners you know, every street your feet instinctively follow without needing to check for directions. The city was beautiful, it really was, a towering architectural celebration of curves and polish and colored light, laced with the connective threads of elevated rail lines and smooth footpaths flocked with leaves that spilled lushly from every balcony and center divider. Every inhaled breath perfumed with cooking spice, fresh nectar, laundry drying in the pristine air. The city was a healthy place, a thriving place, a never-ending harmony of making, doing, growing, trying, laughing, running, living. Sibling Dex was so tired of it. All right, we'll leave it there. But that's like the first couple of pages into a psalm for the Wildbuilt. That book is, again, one of my favorites, and it kind of uses the sci-fi realm to help answer some psychological questions. And it's also just an interesting concept of like, what if essentially our machines that we create one day just got up and walked away. The next book is kind of a different kind of one. It is called, it's called The Raven Boys by Maggie Steifvater. This is a book that I just finished not too long ago, last year, and it struck me as a really unique book. It's not a book that I've ever read before. The Raven Boys is not something that I think the premise itself is very similar to other YA type novels, but the characterization and the complexity of the story, as well as the characters, leaves me sort of confused. Not confused. It's just it just leaves me at kind of a loss, because I don't think I've ever thought in the way that Maggie Steifvater thinks about people. And I don't know how to explain that further than that. I know that that's horribly unfortunate because I'm not good at I'm getting better, but I'm not good at talking about books because I have these complex feelings about them, and then I go a long time without reading them, and then I find myself at a loss of words because the only thing I feel about these books is just the vibe that I got. And the Raven Boys vibe is a very particular vibe that I think is the same way with A Psalm for the Wildbuilt, is you have to be in the right mood for it. And I was in the right mood for it. And so that's why it's still one of my favorites today. So let me talk about the plot a little bit. So this is a series. I've only ever read the first book, but I have heard the rest of the series is equally as good, if not better. So I still need to get back into it. Okay, a fun thing about me, I guess not a fun thing, but an interesting fact about me is I really struggle with series. I tend to only read the first book in a series or even the first two. I like exposition. I like getting to know a new world and a new interesting concept, but I get bored of it really easily. So even though I may like the first book, I may get bored of it. And so what I end up doing is reading the first book, putting the series away, going on to a new world, and then like in a book, and then coming back to that world later because I can't just read series back to back to back. That's just not how I enjoy reading. So a lot of my favorite books are series that I have left unfinished, which is a good thing because that means that like I have a lot to look forward to, but it also means that I forget a lot what happens in the original books. So I may have to take a minute to kind of figure out what happened again. But okay, let's talk about the plot. I don't want to read. This is kind of a long plot, but we'll get through it as best we can. So the Raven Cycle follows the story, and the Raven Cycle is what the whole series is called. The Raven Cycle by Maggie Steifvater. The Raven Cycle follows the story of teenagers Blue Sargent, Richard Campbell Gansey III, Adam Parrish, Ronan Lynch, and Noah, taking place in the fictional town of Henrietta, Virginia. Blue lives with her mother Maura and an assortment of other female relatives, all of whom are psychics except for Blue, whose only supernatural quality is the ability to amplify the power of others. All her life, Blue's clairvoyant relatives have predicted that if she kisses her true love, he will die. Blue joins her half-aunt Neve, who has arrived in Henrietta under mysterious circumstances, an annual tradition of watching the spirits of those in Henrietta who are destined to die within the next year appear along an invisible line called the Corpse Road. Blue, having never been able to see the spirits before, sees a teenage boy who introduces himself only as Gansey. Neve tells Blue that she could see his spirit either because he is her true love or because she will kill him. So that's the start of the book. I'm going to leave the rest because I think that's the only really big plot points you're given when you first start this book, is that we have this girl who sees either the person who she will kill or the person her true love, essentially. But in Blue's case, she also has this prediction that she will kill her true love if she kisses them. So it's kind of a both statement, not an either or statement for Blue. So I'm going to read the prologue for you. So Blue Sergeant had forgotten how many times she'd been told that she would kill her true love. Her family traded in predictions. These predictions tended, however, to run towards the non-specific. Things like, something terrible will happen to you today. It might involve the number 6. Or, money is coming. Open your hand for it. Or, you have a big decision and it will not make itself. The people who came to the little bright blue house at 300 Fox Way didn't mind the imprecise nature of their fortunes. It became a game, a challenge to realize the exact moment that the predictions came true. When a van carrying 6 people wheeled into a client's car 2 hours after his psychic reading, he could nod with a sense of accomplishment and release. When a neighbor offered to buy another client's old lawnmower if she was looking for a bit of extra cash, she could recall the promise of money coming and sell it with the sense that that transaction had been foretold. Or when a third client heard his wife say, "This is a decision that has to be made," he could remember the same words being said by Mora, Sargent, over a spread of tarot cards, and then leap decisively to action. But the imprecise nature of the fortunes stole some of their power. The predictions could be dismissed as coincidences, hunches. They were a chuckle in the Walmart parking lot when you ran into an old friend as promised, a shiver when the number 17 appeared on an electric bill, a realization that even if you had discovered the future, it really didn't change how you lived in the present. They were truth, but they weren't all of the truth. I should tell you, Moore always advised her new clients, that this reading will be accurate, but not specific. It was easier this way, but this is not what Blue was told. Again and again, she had her fingers spread wide, her palm examined, her cards plucked from velvet-edged decks, and spread across the fuzz of a family friend's living room carpet. Thumbs were pressed to the mysterious, invisible third eye that was said to lie between everyone's eyebrows. Runes were cast and dreams interpreted, tea leaves scrutinized, and seances conducted. All the women came to the same conclusion, blunt and inevitably specific. What they all agreed on in many different clairvoyant languages was this: if Blue was to kiss her true love, he would die. For a long time, this bothered Blue. The warning was specific, certainly, but in the way of a fairy tale. It didn't say how her true love would die. It didn't say how long after the kiss he would survive. Did it have to be a kiss on the lips? Would a chaste peck on the back of his palm prove as deadly? Until she was 11, Blue was convinced she would silently contract an infectious disease. One press of her lips to her hypothetical soulmate, and he too would die in a consumptive battle untreatable by modern medicine. When she was 13, Blue decided that jealousy would kill him instead. An old boyfriend emerging at the moment of that first kiss, bearing a handgun and a heart full of hurt. When she turned 15, Blue concluded that her mother's tarot cards had just a pack of playing cards and that the dreams of her mother and the other clairvoyant women were fueled by mixed drinks rather than otherworldly insight. And so the prediction doesn't matter. She knew better, though. The predictions that came out of 300 Foxway were unspecific but undeniably true. Her mother had dreamt Blue's broken wrist on the first day of school. Her Aunt Jimmy predicted Mora's tax return to within $10. Her older cousin Orla always began to hum her favorite song a few minutes before it came on the radio. No one in the house ever truly doubted that Blue was destined to kill her first love with a kiss. It was a threat, however, that had been around for so long that it had lost its force. Picturing 6-year-old Blue in love was such a far-off thing as to be imaginary. And by 16, Blue had decided she would never fall in love, so it didn't matter. But that belief changed when her mother's half-sister Neve came to their little town of Henrietta. Neve had gotten famous for doing loudly what Blue's mother did quietly. Mora's readings were done in her front room, mostly for residents of Henrietta and the valley around it. Neve, on the other hand, did her readings on television at 5 o'clock in the morning. She had a website featuring old, soft-focus photographs of her staring unerringly at the viewer. 4 books on the supernatural bore her name on the cover. Blue had never met Neve, so she knew more about her half-aunt from a cursory web search than from personal experience. Blue wasn't sure why Neve was coming to visit, but she knew her imminent arrival spurred a legion of whispered conversations between Maura and her 2 best friends, Persephone and Calla. The sort of conversations that trailed off into sipping coffee and tapping pens on the table when Blue entered the room. But Blue wasn't particularly concerned about Neve's arrival. What was one more woman in a house filled to the brim with them. Neve finally appeared on a spring evening, when the already long shadows of the mountains to the west seemed even longer than usual. When Blue opened the door for her, she thought for a moment that Neve was an unfamiliar old woman. But when her eyes grew used to the stretched crimson light coming through the trees, and she saw that Neve was barely older than her mother, which was not very old at all. Outside in the distance, hounds were crying. Blue was familiar enough with their voices. Each fall, the Aglian Bee Hunt Club rode out with horses and foxhounds nearly every weekend. Blue knew what their frantic howls meant at that moment. They were on the chase. "You're Maura's daughter," Neve said. And before Blue could answer, she added, "This is the year you'll fall in love." Okay, so that's the first couple pages or the first prologue of The Raven Boys. Again, it is definitely worth a read. It is something that I find myself thinking about a lot in terms of just the vibe, I guess. It's just such a unique way of telling the story. I just really like Maggie Steifvater's writing style, I think, is the main takeaway here. I think that's what I'm trying to say. I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain vibes of books, personally, I find. Okay, so the next book I want to talk about is a book called Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. And this book is a romance book. So if you're not into romance books, I would not recommend this one. So again, this is a duology, I believe. Yeah. This is a duology. It was my favorite book, I think, back in 2023 that I read. It's in the young adult romantasy genre, meaning romance and fantasy. And I guess I would agree. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a romance more than a fantasy. There's fantasy elements for sure, but the main thing is the romance. If you are into tropes, which most people I feel like are, if you are a reader like me, you'll notice that a lot of readers or writers often include tropes that they say are in this novel, and this one is definitely an enemies to lovers romantasy. It is also historical fiction. It's taken place in kind of I wouldn't even say it's historical fiction. It's just like not in the present day. It's definitely giving more like Victorian era almost. It's steampunky in that like Victorian era way is, I guess, the best way to describe it. It's very much like it's impossible to explain the vibe. The vibe of this book is like dark green. It's dark green. I don't know why I'm getting dark green from this book, but it feels dark green, like a forest green. So let me just explain the plot really quick because that's not helpful. Divine Rivals is written by Rebecca Ross. So it says, all 18-year-old Winnow wants to do is hold her family together. Yeah. With a brother on the front line forced to fight on behalf of the gods, now missing from the front line, and a mother drowning her sorrows, Iris's best bet is winning the columnist promotion at the Oath Gazette. But when Iris's letters to her brother fall into the wrong hands, that of the handsome but cold Roman Kit, her rival at the paper, an unlikely magical connection forms. Expelled into the middle of a mystical war, magical typewriters in tow, can their bond withstand the fight for the fate of mankind, and importantly, love? So I'm just going to hop right into the prologue of this book because I'm not doing a good job of explaining the vibe here, but it is important to me that you understand that the vibe is green, dark green. I don't know why that was the vibe that I got here, and you can probably tell just based off of this prologue. Cold fog had settled over the depot like a burial shroud, and Iris Winnow thought the weather couldn't have been better. She could hardly see the train through the gloam, but she could taste it in the evening air, metal and smoke and burning coal, all woven together with a trace of petrichor. The wooden platform was thick beneath her shoes, gleaming with rain puddles and piles of decaying leaves. When Forrest came to a stop at her side, she stopped as well, as if she were in his mirror. The two of them were often mistaken for twins, with their wide, set hazel eyes, wavy chestnut hair, and the freckles that spilled across their noses. But Forrest was tall, Iris petite. He was 5 years her senior, and for the first time in her life, Iris wished that she were older than him. "I won't be gone long," he said. "Only a few months, I think." Her brother glanced at her in the fading light, waiting for her to respond. It was eventide, the moment between darkness and light, when the constellations began to dust the sky and the city lamps flickered to life in reply. Iris could feel the draw of it, Forrest's concerned stare, and the golden light that illuminated the low-hanging clouds. And yet her eyes wandered, just desperate for distraction, a moment to blink away her tears before Forrest could see them. There was a soldier to her right, a young woman dressed in a perfectly starched uniform. Iris was struck by a wild thought, one that must have traveled across her face because Forrest cleared his throat. "I should come with you," Iris said, meeting his gaze. "It's not too late." "No, Iris," Forrest replied sharply. "You made me 2 promises, remember?" 2 promises, hardly a day old. Iris frowned. "How could I forget? Then speak them back to me." She crossed her arms to ward off the autumn chill and the strange cadence in Forrest's voice. There was a hint of desperation she hadn't heard in him until now, and goose flesh rippled across her arms beneath her thin sweater. "Take care of Mom," she said, mimicking his baritone. It brought a smile to his face. "Stay in school." "I believe was a bit more than a gruff stay in school," Forrest said, nudging her foot with his boot. "You brilliant academic who has yet to miss a day of class in all her years. They give awards for that, you know." "Fine," Iris relented, a blush nipping at her cheeks. "You said, promise me you'll enjoy your final year of school, and I will be back in time to see you graduate." "Yes," Forrest said, but his smile began to wane. He didn't know when he'd return. It was a promise he couldn't keep to her, although he continued to make it sound as if the war would end in a matter of months, a war that had only just begun. What if I had been the one to hear the song, Iris thought, her heart so heavy it felt bruised against her ribs. If I had encountered the goddess and not him, would he let me go like this? Her gaze dropped to Forrest's chest, the place where his own heart was beating beneath his olive green uniform. A bullet could pierce him in a split second. A bullet could keep him from ever returning home. "Forrest, She was interrupted by a shrill whistle that made her jump. It was the last call to board, and there was a sudden shuffle toward the train cars. Iris shivered again. "Here," Forrest said, settling down his leather satchel. "I want you to have this." Iris watched as her brother opened the clasp and withdrew his tan-colored trench coat. He held it out to her, arching his brow when she merely stared at him. "But you'll need it," she argued. "They'll give me one," he replied. "Something war-approved, I imagine. Go on, take it, little flower." Iris swallowed, accepting his trench coat. She slipped her arms into it, belting the worn fabric tight across her waist. It was too big for her, but it was comforting. It felt like armor. She sighed. "You know, this smells like the horologist's shop," she drawled. Forrest laughed. And what exactly does a horologist's shop smell like? Like dusty, half-wound clocks and expensive oils, and those tiny metal instruments used to fix all the broken pieces. But that was only partly true. The coat also held a remnant of the Revel diner, where she and Forrest would eat dinner at least twice a week, while their mother waited tables. It smelled of the riverside park, of moss and damp stones, and long walks, and Forrest's sandalwood aftershave, because no matter how much he wanted one, he couldn't grow a beard. Then it should keep you good company, he said, slinging his satchel over his shoulder, and you can have the wardrobe all to yourself now. Iris knew he was trying to lighten the mood, but it only made her stomach ache to think about the small closet they shared in their flat, as if she would truly store his clothes somewhere else while he was gone. I'm sure I'll need the spare hangers since, as you well know, I keep up with all the current fashion trends, Iris countered wryly, hoping Forrest couldn't hear the sadness in her voice. He only smiled. This was it then. The platform was nearly empty of soldiers, and the train was hissing through the gloom. A knot welled in Iris's throat. She bit the inside of her cheek as Forrest embraced her. She closed her eyes, feeling the scratch of his linen uniform against her cheek, and she held the words she wanted to say in her mouth like water. How can you love this goddess more than me? How can you leave me like this? Their mother had already spoken such sentiments, angry and upset with Forrest for enlisting. Astor Winnow had refused to come to the depot to see him off, and Iris imagined she was at home weeping as the denial wore away. The train began to move, creeping along the tracks. Forrest slipped from Iris's arms. Write to me, she whispered. I promise. He took a few steps backward, holding her gaze. There was no fear in her eyes, only a dark, feverish determination. And then Forrest turned, rushing to board the train. Iris followed until he disappeared into the closest car. She lifted her hand and waved, even as tears blurred her vision, and she stood on the platform long after the train had vanished into the fog. Rainwater was seeping into her shoes. The lamps flickered overhead, buzzing like wasps. The crowd had dispersed, and Iris felt hollow, alone, as she began to walk home. Her hands were cold, and she slipped them into her coat pockets. That was when she felt it, a crinkle of paper. Frowning, she assumed it was a candy wrapper that Forrest had forgotten about until she pulled it out, studied in the dim light. It was a small piece of paper folded crookedly with a vein of typed words. Iris couldn't resist smiling, even as her heart ached. She read, Just in case you didn't know, you are by far the best sister I've ever had. I'm so proud of you, and I'll be home before you know it, little flower. So that's the prologue of that book. Again, it just feels like rain, this book. It feels like that vibe that I just read to you doesn't let up ever. It's foresty, it's green, it's rainy, it's walking through the city in puddles, wearing a high-heeled boot and long skirts, and like a pencil through your hair. Like, that's the sort of vibe this book gives off. And I really enjoy that vibe. And if you enjoy that vibe too, I would recommend this book and then also it's kind of giving like pre-war, World War I kind of vibes as well, because they actually do end up going to the war and like the war front. So if you like war, like the pre-war World War I kind of fashion and era in which like women enter the workforce and like those types of things, this also gives that kind of vibe as well. So let me look for the next book I want to talk about. I'll probably do only one more. So this next book is Circe by Madeline Miller. A lot of people would actually recommend her other book that she wrote called The Song of Achilles, which I also liked that book, but again, this is a book that came to me in the right time, and I have a habit of picking up Greek mythology books and absolutely devouring them, and this book was no exception. I do think that everyone in BookTube can agree on one thing, And that one thing is that Madeline Miller is a master at writing. And I think to write a good book, you don't really need to be a master at writing. I just want to preface this. It sounds like a weird contradictory statement, but I do feel like someone who has a good idea and some knowledge on how to craft a story can do a really good job of getting people to put a bunch of hours into a story. If you have likable enough characters, if you have a story concept that gets people excited and going places, you could probably write an 800-page book and people will read it. And I feel like that's shown over and over again when we get stories that I don't think were necessarily supposed to be as long as they were, but they end up being way too long because they were getting lots of money from it. I'm being totally honest here. So like series that keep going on and on and on, and you're like, you could have stopped after like the third book, but now it's like the 10th book and you don't know why it's still happening. It's because of money. That's why it's still happening. But like those writers, and like I feel like a lot of recent writers that I've read, the concepts, the stories, the characters themselves are decent. I like the concept enough that I picked up the book, right? But the execution was not it. And I feel like if you ever pick up a Madeline Miller book, you'll find that she is exceptional at executing her stories in a way that makes you feel things, good or bad. So any concept that Madeline Miller pitches, I'm going to be like, yeah, okay, let's do it. So, and most of her stories have to do, well, I haven't seen what she's recently been doing, but the two that I know of are about Greek mythology. If you're not into Greek mythology, Madeline Miller may not be for you, but if you at least have a little bit of interest in it, I think that you will be shocked at how much emotion she can bring out of you for people who have been dead for a very long time. So let me just read the back of the book for you. It says, in the house of Helios, god of the sun and mightiest of the Titans, a daughter is born. But Circe is a strange child, not powerful like her father, nor viciously alluring like her mother. Turning to the world of mortals for companionship, she discovers that she does possess power, the power of witchcraft, which can transform rivals into monsters and menace the gods themselves. Threatened, Zeus banishes Circe to a deserted island, where she hones her occult craft and crosses paths with many of the most famous figures in all of mythology, including the Minotaur, Daedalus and his doomed son Icarus, the murderous Medea, and of course, wily Odysseus. But there is danger too for a woman who stands alone, and Circe unwittingly draws the wrath of both men and gods, ultimately finding herself pitted against one of the most terrifying and vengeful of the Olympians. To protect what she holds dear, Circe must summon her strength and choose once and for all whether she belongs with the gods she is born from or the mortals she has come to love. So that is the story. Let me get into the actual book here. Chapter 1. When I was born, the name for what I was did not exist. They called me Nymph, assuming I would be like my mother and aunts and 1,000 cousins. Least of the lesser goddesses, our powers were so modest they could scarcely ensure our eternities. We spoke to fish and nurtured flowers, coaxed drops from the clouds or salt from the waves. The word nymph paced out the length and breadth of our futures. In our language, it means not just goddess, but bride. My mother was one of them. A naiad, guardian of fountains and streams. She caught my father's eye when he came to visit the halls of her own father, Oceanus. Helios and Oceanus were often at each other's tables in those days. They were cousins and equal in age, though they did not look it. My father glowed bright as just forged bronze, while Oceanus had been born with rheumy eyes and a white beard to his lap. Yet they were both Titans and preferred each other's companies to those new squeaking gods upon Olympus who had not seen the making of the world. Oceanus's place was a great wonder, set deep in the earth's rock. Its high arched halls were gilded, the stone floors smoothed by centuries of divine feet, though every room ran the faint sound of Oceanus's river, source of the world's fresh waters, so dark you could not tell where it ended and the rock bed began. On its banks grew grass and soft gray flowers, and also the unnumbered children of Oceanus, naiads and nymphs and river gods. Otter sleek, laughing, their faces bright against the dusky air, they passed golden goblets amongst themselves and wrestled, playing games of love. In their midst, outshining all that lily beauty, sat my mother. Her hair was a warm brown, each strand so lustrous it seemed lit from within. She would have felt my father's gaze hot as gusts from a bonfire. I see her arrange her dress so it drapes just so over her shoulders. I see her dab her fingers glinting in the water. I have seen her do 1,000 such tricks 1,000 times. My father always fell for them. He believed the world's natural order was to please him. Who is that? My father said to Oceanus. Oceanus had many golden-eyed grandchildren from my father already, and was glad to think of more. My daughter Percy, she is yours if you want her. The next day my father found her by the fountain pool in the upper world. It was a beautiful place, crowded with fat-headed narcissus woven over the oak branches. There was no muck, no slimy frogs, only clean round stones giving way to grass. Even my father, who cared nothing for the subtleties of nymph arts, admired it. My mother knew he was coming. Frail she was, but crafty, with a mind like a spike-toothed eel. She saw where the path to power lay for such as her, and it was not in bastards and river-bank tumbles. When he stood before her, arrayed in his glory, she laughed at him. Lie with you? Why should I? My father, of course, might have taken what he wanted, but Helios flattered himself that all women went eager to his bed, slave girls and divinities alike. His altars smoked with the proof, offerings from big-bellied mothers and happy byblows. It is marriage, she said to him, or nothing. And if it is marriage, be sure you may have what girls you like in the field, but you will bring none home, for only I will hold sway in your halls. Conditions, constrainment, these were novelties to my father, and gods love nothing more than novelty. A bargain, he said, and gave her a necklace to seal it, one of his own making, strung with beads of rarest amber. Later, when I was born, he gave her a second strand, and another for each of my 3 siblings. I do not know which she treasured more, the luminous beads themselves or the envy of her sisters when she wore them. I think she would have gone right on collecting them into eternity until they hung from her neck like a yoke on an ox if the high gods had not stopped her. By then they had learned that the 4 of us were. You may have other children, they told her, only not with him, but other husbands did not give amber beads. It was the only time I ever saw her weep. At my birth, an aunt, I will spare you her name because my tale is full of aunts, washed and wrapped me. Another tended to my mother, painting the red back on her lips, brushing her hair with ivy combs. A third went to the door to admit my father. A girl, my mother said to him, wrinkling her nose. But my father did not mind his daughters, who were sweet-tempered and golden as the first press of olives. Men and gods paid dearly for the chance to breed from their blood, and my father's treasury was said to rival that of the king of the gods himself. He placed his hand on my head in blessing. She will make a fair match, he said. How fair? My mother wanted to know. This might be consolation if I could be traded for something better. My father considered, figuring the wisps of my hair, examining my eyes and the cut of my cheeks. A prince, I think. A prince, my mother said. You do not mean a mortal. The revulsion was plain on her face. Once, when I was young, I asked what mortals looked like. My father said, You may say they are shaped like us, but only as the worm is shaped like the whale. My mother had been simpler, like savage bags of rotten flesh. Surely she will marry a son of Zeus, my mother insisted. She had already begun imagining herself at feasts upon Olympus, sitting at Queen Hera's right hand. No, her hair is streaked like a lynx, and her chin, there is no sharpness to it that is less than pleasing. My mother did not argue further. Like everyone, she knew the stories of Helios's temper when he was crossed. However gold he shines, do not forget his fire. She stood. Her belly was gone, her waist reknitted, her cheeks fresh and virgin rosy. All our kind recover quickly, but she was faster still, one of the daughters of Oceanus, who shoot their babes like roe. Come, she said, let us make a better one. I grew quickly. My infancy was the work of hours, my toddlerhood a few moments beyond that. An aunt stayed on hoping to curry favor with my mother, and named me Hawk, Circe, for my yellow eyes and the strange thin sound of my crying. But when she realized that my mother no more noticed her service than the ground at her feet, she vanished. Mother, I said, Aunt is gone. My mother didn't answer. My father had already departed for his chariot in the sky, and she was winding her hair with flowers, preparing to leave through the secret ways of water to join her sisters on their grassy river banks. I might have followed, but then I would have had to sit all day at my aunt's feet while they gossiped of things I did not care for and could not understand, so I stayed. My father's halls were dark and silent. His palace was a neighbor to Oceanus's, buried in the earth's rock, and its walls were made of polished obsidian. Why not? They could have been anything in the world, blood-red marble from Egypt or balsam from Araby. My father had only to wish it so. But he liked the way that obsidian reflected his light, the way its slick surfaces caught fire as he passed. Of course, he did not consider how black it would be once he was gone. My father had never been able to imagine the world without himself in it. I could do what I liked at those times, light a torch and run to see the dark flames follow me, lie on the smooth earth floor and wear small holes in its surface with my fingers. There was no grubs or worms, though I don't know to miss them. Nothing lived in those halls except for us. When my father returned at night, the ground rippled like the flank of a horse, and the holes I had made smoothed themselves over. A moment later, my mother returned, smelling of flowers. She ran to greet him, and he let her hang from his neck, accepted wine, went to his great silver chair. I followed at his heels. Welcome home, father, welcome home. While he drank his wine, he played draughts. No one was allowed to play with him. He placed the stone counters, spun the board, and placed them again. My mother drenched her voice in honey. Will you not come to bed, my love? She turned before him slowly, showing the lushness of her figure, as if she was roasting on a spit. Most often he would leave his game then, but sometimes he did not, and those were my favorite times, for my mother would go, slamming the myrwood door behind her. At my father's feet, the whole world was made of gold. The light came from everywhere at once, his yellow skin, his lambent eyes, the bronze flashing of his hair. His flesh was hot as brazier, and I pressed as close as he would let me, like a lizard, to noonday rocks. My aunt had said that some of the lesser gods could scarcely bear to look at him, but I was his daughter in blood, and I stared at his face so long that when I looked away, it was pressed upon my vision, still glowing from the floors, the shining walls and inlaid tables, even my own skin. What would happen, I said, if a mortal saw you in your fullest glory? He would be burned to ash in a second. What if a mortal saw me? My father smiled. I listened to the draught pieces moving, the familiar rasp of marble against wood. The mortal would count himself fortunate. I would not burn him? Of course not, he said. But my eyes are like yours. No, he said. Look. His gaze fell upon a log at the fireplace's side. It glowed, then flamed, then fell to ash to the ground. And that is the least of my powers. Can you do as much? All night I stared at those logs. I could not. My sister was born, and my brother soon after that. I cannot say how long it was exactly. Divine days felt like water from a cataract, and I had not learned yet the mortal trick of counting them. You'd think my father would have taught us better, for he, after all, knows every sunrise. But even he used to call my brother and sister twins. Certainly, from the moment of my brother's birth, they were entwined like minks. My father's blessed them both with one hand. You, he said to my luminous sister Pasiphae, you will marry an eternal son of Zeus. He used his prophecy voice, the one that spoke of future certainties. My mother glowed to hear it, thinking of the robes she would wear to Zeus's feast. And you, he said to my brother in a regular voice, resonant, clear as a summer morning. Every son reflects upon his mother. My mother was pleased with this, and took it as permission to name him. She called him Perses, for herself. The two of them were clever, and quickly saw how things stood. They love to sneer at me behind their ermine paws. Her eyes are yellow as piss. Her voice is squeaky as an owl. She is called Hawk, but she should be called Goat for her ugliness. Those were their earliest attempts at barbs. Still dull, but day by day they sharpened. I learned to avoid them, and they soon found better spot amongst the infant naiads and river lords of Oceanus' halls. When my mother went to her sisters, they followed and established dominion over all our pliant cousins, hypnotized like minnows before the pike's mouth. They had 100 tormenting games they had devised. "Come, Malia," they coaxed. "It is the Olympian fashion to cut off your hair to the nape of your neck. How will you ever catch a husband if you don't let us do it?" When Malia saw herself shorn like a hedgehog and cried, they would laugh till the caverns echoed. I left them to it. I preferred my father's quiet halls and spent every second I could at my father's feet. One day, perhaps as a reward, he offered to take me with him to visit his sacred herd of cows. This was a great honor, for it meant I might ride in his golden chariot and see the animals that were the envy of all the gods. 50 pure white heifers that delighted his eye on his daily path over the earth. I leaned over the chariot's jeweled side, watching in wonder as the earth passing beneath, the rich green of forests, the jagged mountains, and the wide outflung blue of the ocean. I looked for mortals, but we were too high up to see them. The herd lived on a grassy island of Thrinacia, with 2 of my half-sisters as caretakers. When we arrived, these sisters ran at once to my father and hung from his neck, exclaiming, of all my father's beautiful children, they were among the most beautiful, with skin and hair like molten gold. Lampetia and Phaestusa, their names were, radiant and shining. "And who is this you have brought with you? She must be one of Perseus' children. Look at her eyes." "Of course, Lampetia." I thought it was Lampetia stroked my hair. "Darling, your eyes are nothing to worry about. Nothing at all. Your mother is very beautiful, but she was never been strong." "My eyes are like yours," I said. "How sweet." "No, darling, ours is bright as fire, and our hair like sun on the water." "You're clever to keep yours in a braid," Phaestusa said. "The brown streaking does not look so bad then. It is a shame you cannot hide your voice the same way." "She could never speak again. That would work, would it not, sister?" "So it would," they smiled. "Shall we go see the cows?" I had never seen a cow before of any kind, but it did not matter. The animals were so obviously beautiful that I needed no comparison. Their coats were pure as lily petals and their eyes gentle and long-lashed. Their horns had been gilded. That was my sister's doing, and when they bent to crop the grass, their necks dipped like dancers. In the sunset light, their backs gleamed glossy soft. "Oh," I said, "may I touch one?" "No," my father said. Shall we tell you their names? That is Whiteface, and that is Bright Eyes, and that Darling, there is Lovely Girl and Pretty, and Golden Horn and Gleaming. There is Darling, and that is... "You named Darling already," I said. "You said that one was Darling." I pointed to the first cow, peacefully chewing. My sisters looked at each other, then at my father. A single golden glance, but he was gazing at his cows in abstracted glory. "You must be mistaken," they said. "This one we said is Darling, and that one is Starbright, and this one Flashing, and..." My father said, "What is this? A scab upon Pretty?" Immediately my sisters were falling over themselves. "What scab? Oh, it cannot be. Oh, wicked Pretty to have hurt yourself. Oh, wicked thing, they hurt you?" I leaned close to see. It was a very small scab, smaller than my smallest fingernail, but my father was frowning. "You will fix it by tomorrow." My sisters bobbed their heads. Of course, we are so sorry." We stepped again into the chariot, and my father took up the silver-tipped reins. My sisters pressed a few last kisses to his hand. Then the horses leapt, swinging us through the sky. The first constellations were already peeping through the dimming light. I remembered how my father had once told me that on Earth there were men called astronomers, whose task it was to keep track of his rising and setting. They were held in highest esteem amongst mortals, kept in palaces as counselors of kings. But sometimes my father lingered over one thing or another, and threw their calculations into despair. Then those astronomers were hauled before the kings they served and killed as frauds. My father had smiled when he told me. It was what they deserved, he said. Helios the sun was bound to no will but his own, and none might say what he would do. "Father," I said that day, Are we late enough to kill astronomers? We are, he answered, shaking the jingling reins. The horses surged forward and the world blurred beneath us, the shadows of night smoking from the sea's edge. I did not look. There was a twisting feeling in my chest, like cloth being wrung dry. I was thinking of those astronomers. I imagined them low as worms, sagging and bent. Please, they cried on bony knees. It wasn't our fault. The sun itself was late. The sun is never late, the kings answered from their thrones. It is blasphemy to say so. You must die. And so the axes fell and chopped those pleading men in two. Father, I said, I feel strange. You are hungry, he said. It is past time for the feast. Your sisters should be ashamed of themselves for delaying us. I ate well at dinner, yet the feeling lingered. I must have had an odd look on my face, for Perseus and Pasiphae began to snicker from their couch. Did you swallow a frog? No, I said. This only made them laugh harder, rubbing their draped limbs on each other like snakes polishing their scales. My sister said, And how were our father's golden heifers? Beautiful. Perseus laughed. She doesn't know. Have you ever heard of anything so stupid? Never, my sister said. I shouldn't have asked, but I was still drifting in my thoughts, seeing those severed bodies sprawled on marble floors. What don't I know? My sister's perfect mink face. That he fucks them, of course. That's how he makes new ones. He turns into a bull and sires their calves, then cooks the ones that get old. That's why everyone thinks they are immortal. He does not. They howled, pointing at my reddened cheeks. The sound drew my mother. She loved my siblings' japes. We're telling Circe about the cows, my brother told her. She didn't know. My mother's laughter, silver as a fountain down its rocks. Stupid Circe. Such were my years then. I would like to say that all the while I waited to break out, but the truth is, I'm afraid I might have floated on, believing those dull miseries were all there was, until the end of days. That's the first chapter of Circe. I hope you enjoyed these little snippets of stories that I love. And let me know if you're interested or you have read one or most of these already. They're all very popular, I think. I also just want to say, like, really quick that you guys, if don't bother buying them, you should go to your local library. I am a huge proponent of the library. I only buy books that I absolutely adore, that I've already read. I used to buy like lots and lots and lots of books, and I have a bookcase full of them, and not all of them I love, but I do feel like either thrift your books, as in like go to a thrift store or a used bookstore, or go to the library to buy your books, because and I mean, you can't buy books from the library, but borrow the books you're not sure that you're gonna like. However, all of these books I have bought and will be keeping. I also have a Kindle Unlimited membership, which allows you to borrow a certain number of books from the limited Kindle Unlimited bookshelves, and Divine Rivals is on Kindle Unlimited. So if you want to read that book and you have Kindle Unlimited, that would be a good one for you to read. So anyway, this is all just to say, I hope that you utilize your library as much as possible, because it is a lovely place to just be and hang out. And they also have a app you can use called Libby. If you already have a library card, you can get a Libby app, and you can download virtual books on your phone or on your computer, or if you have a Kindle, you can download it on your Kindle. So anyway, that's all. And so I hope you enjoyed this lovely little snippet of some of my favorite stories. Let me know if you like this and you want to see more of this. But all in all, I'm just happy to have you, and I hope to see you all very, very soon. Okay, goodbye.